This video is operations with complex numbers. A complex number is in the form of a plus bi, where a is our real part and the bi is our imaginary because I stands for imaginary. Okay, we're going to start with adding and subtracting complex numbers. So when we add and subtract, we combine like terms. So 4 and 12 are the like terms because they do not have an I with them. So 4 plus 12 is 16. Then I combine my i's, my imaginary parts. So 3i plus 5i. 3i plus 5i is 8i. 8i. So my answer is 16 plus 8i. Okay, example 2. Notice now I have a subtraction. What I need to do is I need to distribute this negative sign to everything after it in the parentheses. So the 4 plus 3i stays the same. A negative times 12 or a negative 1 times 12 is a negative 12. A negative 1 times a 5i is a negative 5i. Now I just combine like terms. So 4 minus 12 is a negative 8. 3i minus 5i is a negative 2i. And there we go. That's our answer. 8 minus 2i. Okay, moving on to powers of I. Okay, the powers of I follow this following pattern. We have I. I to the first is I. I squared is negative 1. I cubed is negative I. I to the fourth is 1. And then the pattern starts over. So we have I to the fifth, which is I to the sixth, which is negative 1. I to the seventh is negative I, and I to the eighth is 1. The pattern keeps repeating every 4. So what we do is we take our exponent. So if I'm looking at the exponent of 7, if it repeats every 4, I take 7 divided by 4. 7 divided by 4. And when I do that in my calculator, my outcome is 1.75. What I look for is this decimal, 0.75. If my decimal is 0.75, that means my answer will be negative I. If I divide 3 by 4, I also get 0.75 as my answer. So 75. So if my decimal is 0.75 or 0.75 as a decimal, then my answer will be negative I. If I type in my calculator and I get it to be 0.5 as a decimal, we don't care about the number in front of the decimal, but my decimal is 0.5, my answer will be negative 1. If I get it to be 0.25, my answer will be I. And if I get it to divide evenly, meaning no decimal, no remainder, my answer will be 1, so no decimal. So all we're looking at to see what our decimal is, what our remainder is it 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, or it divides evenly, we have no decimal. So let's look at some examples. So example 1, I have 34, I to the 34th power. Okay, so what I do is I take my exponent, 34, I divide it by 4 because that's our pattern. After every 4 it repeats. Okay, when I divide it, I'm just looking for the decimal, so that's all I'm going to write down. So when I type it in my calculator, 34 divided by 4, my decimal is 0.5. If it is 0.5, my answer is negative 1. So I to the 34th power equals negative 1. That's what we're looking for, that negative 1. Example 2. Notice now I have a negative 8 in front. So that's the same thing as saying negative 8 times I to the 19th power. Negative 8 times I to the 19th power. So we need to simplify that I to the 19th power. So what I do is I take 19, I divide it by 4 because it's my pattern. I look for what the decimal is. Okay, my decimal when I do that is 0.75. When it's 0.75, my outcome is negative I. So I to the 19th power is negative I. So what we do is we have negative 8 times I to the 19th, but instead we're going to plug in a negative I. A negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 8 times negative I is a positive 8I, and that is my outcome for that. Moving on, now we're talking about multiplication. Okay, you can do FOIL and this, but I prefer the box method, so I'm going to show you my box method. So in the box method, you start with the box, just like it's science and you're doing genetics with the Punnett squares. Okay, I write my first binomial on the side, so 4 minus 3i. Then I write my second binomial, this one, on top, 8 plus 2i. And now I just multiply and fill in the boxes. So 8 times 4 is 32. 4 times 2i is 8i. 8 times a negative 3i is a negative 24i. And a negative 3i times a positive 2i is a negative 6i squared. But earlier we learned that I squared equals negative 1, so I'm going to simplify. So you get negative 6 times a negative 1, we're replacing that I squared with a negative 1. Negative 6 times a negative 1 is a positive 6. So now I can combine my like terms. So I have 32, which is just a number with no I, so I can combine it with 6. So 32 plus 6 is 38. Then I have my negative 24i and my 8i. So negative 24i plus 8i is a negative 16i. So there is my answer for multiplying this complex numbers. Okay, my last example. Excuse me. I'm doing the same thing. I start with my box. I write my first number on the side, so negative 3 minus a 6i. I write my second one on top, 7 minus 9i, and I just multiply. So here we go. 7 times negative 3 is a negative 21. 7 times a negative 6i is a negative 42i. Negative 3 times a negative 9i is a positive 27i. And a negative 6i times a negative 9i is a positive 54i squared. Remember, I squared equals a negative 1, so I'm going to simplify that and show it. So I replace the I squared with a negative 1. 54 times a negative 1 is a negative 54. So now I have to combine my like terms. So I'm going to combine my negative 21 with my negative 54 because they don't have the i's. So negative 21 minus 54 is a negative 75. Then I combine my i's. I get 27i minus 42i. I get a negative 15i. And this is my answer. So this is a video for operations with complex numbers. I will create another video talking about division.